Good morning. It's time. We have also formed a quorum. I declare the meeting to order. First item, confirmation of minutes. The paper has been circulated to members. The Secretariat has not received any proposals for amendments, and if members do not have proposals for amendments here and now, then let's confirm the minutes of the last meeting. Item 2, information papers issued since the last regular meeting. I don't think I need to bother you with the details. The list has been set out in the agenda, and please take a look. Next, items for discussion at the next meeting. That will be in December. The administration has proposed 3 items. First is about the draft guidelines and other enforcement matters in respect of the fair trading provisions in the Trade Descriptions Ordinance. Second, proposed creation of a permanent post of Judge of Court of First Instance and a permanent post of Deputy Registrar, High Court. And third item is also a matter of concern, and that's the annual tariff review by the 2 power companies. So, any comments or suggestions? If not, then we will have 3 items for the next meeting. The next meeting will be held in the afternoon, because basically whenever we discuss issues involving the 2 power companies, would wait till the stock market is closed, and we will also be extending the meeting till 7:15. In other words, it will be slightly longer than the usual 2-hour meeting. So is that okay? Item 4, shared scheme of control agreements with the 2 power companies interim review in 2013. Let's first invite the administration team to join us. I welcome to Mr. Wong and Ms. Christine Low, Under Secretary, and Ms. Vivian Lau, Deputy Secretary for the Environment, and also Mr. Donald Ng, Principal Assistant Secretary for the Environment, and also Ms. Viola Yao, Principal Assistant Secretary. I'd also like to inform members that we have received a submission from the Anti-Nuclear Power Coalition, and we have already got a response to the deputation. We have also received the Friends of the Earth and also Greenpeace's submission on the issue, and all these papers have also been issued to members before the meeting. First of all, I'll hand over to Mr. Wong, the Bureau Director, who will walk us through the paper. Thank you, Chairman. With regard to the SCA, the Scheme of Control Agreement signed with the 2 power companies, it set out the responsibilities of the shareholders, and also the return, and also the financial arrangements for the 2 power companies under the current SCA. Is valid for 10 years. In other words, it will be expiring in 2018. And the SCA provides that within next year, the administration will have to review the SCA, and there can also be negotiations on areas that will have to be revised, but then we will have to have the agreement of the 2 power companies before we can do it. And in early 2013, under the agreement, the administration will start an interim review with the 2 power companies, and we will also be making preparation for that. We understand that for the members of the public and members of this council, you are all very concerned about this. That's why we plan to discuss with the relevant experts, stakeholders, and also environmentalists and council members on the issue. In fact, during the last month or so, we've already held 2 sessions with the stakeholders, and we have also obtained the view from the ACE, and we will also be doing this before the beginning of the interim review. We will continue to meet with stakeholders. All in all, the interim review will be completed by the end of 2013, and in due course we will also be explaining to you the outcome of the negotiations. Thank you. The floor is now open to members' questions. We will be able to discuss until 10:50, so there should be enough time for members. So 5 minutes each. We have Mr. Wong Kwok Heng, Tang Ka Piu, and Ms. Dari Lee and Mr. Sin Chung Kai. First of all, over to you, Mr. Wong Kwok Heng. Thank you, Chairman. According to the administration's paper, paragraph 5. So, as an incentive for the two power companies to improve their performance in energy efficiency, there will be some $45 million for the CLP, and then $25 million or $20 million for the HEC to improve its performance. In fact, they have already made the most of it. They have been able to achieve a return of 9.99%, and so the administration is now giving them this financial incentive to do even better on top of the permitted rate of return. Is that a bit excessive? With regard to the $45 million and also the $20 million, they should have been used to set up a tariff stabilization fund instead of allowing the two companies to make additional profit out of the already very handsome rate of return. I think they are actually exploiting everything that they can do, and I think it's not fair. And also in calculating the future tariff rise, so it's like a town gas and also water tariff, there is a calculation formula, and if they use more, they will have to pay more. So there is a scale rate, but then at present is a progressive scale, and they will be paying less if they spend more. So should you revise this calculation formula? All right, 2 questions. Chairman, Mr. Wong, thank you for your comment. Well, in the interim review, we'll listen to your views, and wherever possible, we'll see if we need to make any adjustments. But then we will have to strike a balance between 2 aspects. Number 1, we are of course very concerned about the rise in tariff, but then in terms of reduction in emission, we will have to do a bit more, and therefore we will have to look at those in their proper perspectives. Yes, I wonder if my colleague has anything to add. Yes, Vivian. Chairman, under the current SCA, there are certain mechanisms to provide financial incentives to the two power companies so that in different respects they will have to meet certain performance targets. And according to what Mr. Wong said just now, under the SCA, the practice might not be reasonable. Yes, we have heard that, and in the interim review, we'll see what we can do. Yes, thank you for considering my point about financial incentive. But then apparently both the secretary and your officials have not been able to tell us more about the progressive scale. Why is it not like water tariff? Because if you use more, then you will have to pay more. So the per unit tariff will be higher. How come this is not like that here? Well, with regard to the progressive sale, when it comes to commercial dealings, well, different stakeholders have also put forth similar views. That is, we've also talked to experts and academics and also stakeholders. They've also raised similar suggestions. So we will consider that in the upcoming review. We will see what we can do to see if there is any room for adjustments. Because at present, for the low usage customers, they'll be paying something that is not reasonable, because they should have paid less. But then in terms of tariff increase, that's not the way that they pay for their power consumption. And very often the large consumers will be able to negotiate with the power companies for a lower tariff. And therefore, for the low users, they will be subject to the same level of increase, and that's grossly unfair to them. I hope that the administration will consider this seriously. instead of just saying that, well, you will consider that, and I think you should be more proactive and positive. Yes, I think they've already promised that they would consider it, and they will be considering other views as well. Anything to add, Secretary? No. All right, next, Mr. Tan Ka-Biu. Good morning, Bureau Director. Good morning, Chairman. Well, with regard to the views made by Mr. Wong Kwok Heng, I'd like to ask this again. Well, in the interim review, Bureau Director, will the administration be taking back the control with regard to how tariff should be adjusted? I understand that Macau has done this. They've introduced reforms to that effect. And you said that you would be listening to the civic organizations, and of course they will also have to refer to their webpage. For example, for a commercial user, well, for the per unit tariff is 90 cents, but then for the large consumers, in other words, they will have to consume no less than 20,000 units, and the maximum that they will have to pay will be 60 cents per unit. In other words, if you do some calculation for the general business consumers, they'll be spending some 14,000, and then for the large consumers spending some 20,000 units, they'll be paying the same rate. So I don't know if there is any administrative cost, but then you're actually encouraging people to use more. But then what's the problem? We all understand it, because we have a shortage of energy, and at the moral level, it's not right to encourage people to use more, and that would also mean that they will have to have more generators, and as a result our tariff will also go up. And therefore, with regard to the progressive rate for commercial users, I think this is not desirable, and also this is against the world trend. When we talk about asking the two power companies to reduce emission, yes, we understand that they're using a lot of natural gas, and the public have to accept it even if they are not happy with it. But then in terms of the rate of return and also energy saving, you have not done enough, and therefore I'd like to know, with regard to the framework of or the tariff structure, will the administration be taking back the control so that you can have the ultimate say as to how they should charge their customers in terms of the tariff structure? And next, you will also have to give us more figures, because the more we look into it, the more we are dissatisfied. How come the two power companies are selling so much electricity to the mainland, and at the same time we are actually importing power from the Daya Bay nuclear power plant? How come that's the case? Because I don't know if there might be transfer of interest to the power companies. You might have some figures at closed-door meetings, but then how come this is the case? And apparently, in terms of energy efficiency, this is also quite a big waste. So can you give us more figures? And number two, will you be able to have the ultimate say on the tariff structure?
Secretary, Chairman, Mr. Tang, you asked two questions, so I'll answer the first one, and I'll defer the second one to my colleague Vivian. First, in relation to the tariff structure, whether we have any control or participation. Now, we keep an open mind during the interim review. We will consider the views and see how this can be adjusted. When Mr. Tang talked about the Macau's practice, taking into consideration energy saving and emission of reduction, we will consider that tariff structure and see if it's suitable to be applied in Hong Kong. We have heard different voices. For example, for the industrial sector, they might be saving energy, but because of their operational need, they still have to use more energy. I'll defer the second part of the question to Vivian. Chairman, now apart from in relation to selling power to to mainland, I believe that the figures are announced in the interim review, and also in relation to the sale of power to the mainland, we do not increase the capacity or new generation units because of the sale of power in the 5-year development plan. Now, just now I said that for this 5-year development plan, that is from 2009 to 2014, we have not approved any new generation units of the two power companies. So they're only using their backup facilities in supplying electricity to mainland. All right, perhaps, well, that was covered in our previous discussions. The right to the Daya Bay nuclear plant, well, is it the case that the CLP purchased nuclear energy from the Daya Bay, which is a completely unaffiliated company? Before implementation of an agreement, well, they sought government's consent beforehand. For the Daya Bay nuclear plant, 70% of the two generation units are sold to Hong Kong every year, which amounts to 10 billion units. And actually, the CLP invests 25% in Daya Bay nuclear plant, but they get 70% electricity. And now through an investment company of the CLP, the Hong Kong Nuclear Plant Limited, they purchase energy from Daya Bay for Hong Kong's use. Next, Ms. Sherry Lee. Chairman, you may recall that the proposed tariff increase last year caused a wide repercussion in this council when it was tabled. Now, this year I have 3 requests, because earlier on the CLP already leaked out this information. And according to media report, the CLP's proposed increase is at least 13% and at least 10% for HEC, Hong Kong Electric. I don't know if this information is true or not, but if the increase is as reported in the media, then there will definitely be another round of wide repercussion. So I wonder if the two power companies would submit information right before Christmas, so that the council doesn't have enough time to discuss the proposal. And also, similar to last year, they should provide information and full information, so that the council and the general public would have good idea of the estimated increase. So my question is, are the two companies going to submit information to this council right before Christmas? Now, the second question is about the interim review. Secretary, you said that the adjustment of the SCA is subject to mutual agreement. Of course, we don't want the two power companies to maximize their profits, but does the government have any way to stop that? What trump cards do the government have? Introduction of competitors in the electricity supply market. Well, does the government have a firm stance to show its determination in tariff reduction? Otherwise, we will have minimal chance in suppressing the increase, because it's subject to mutual agreement. I look forward to a detailed answer. Secretary. Thank you, Ms. Lee, for your question. Now, the focus of today's discussion is not actually about tariff increase for this year, but let me answer this question. At the appropriate time, after reaching a consensus with the two power companies, and after going through the internal procedures, we will report to the electrical as soon as possible. We hope that by mid-December, we can give an appropriate report on this matter. As for the announcement of information to back our discussion, we hope to follow the adhered practices. Now, Ms. Lee has correctly pointed this out. For the interim review, we have to look at the SCA itself. Of course, is subject to some restraints. We can have an open discussion, but we need to respect the spirit and framework of the SCA. So, frankly speaking, there are constraints. But when we talked about the new SCA in 2018, there will be a larger room for adjustment. Whereas for the interim review, there is relatively smaller room for adjustment. So this is for your consideration. Trump cards, I hope that after hearing views from different sectors, we will come up with ways. Follow-up question, simple one, Chairman. Now, just now I heard that the information for tariff increase will be submitted in mid-December. Can the two power companies undertake that all the information will be provided, or sufficient information provided for electrical's consideration? Vivian. Our working plan is that information will be submitted early next year, and this will be the basis of discussion. I need to follow up on Ms. Dari Lee's point. We hope to get the information as soon as possible. I understand that you need to seek this information before submitting to this council. I hope that this can be done as soon as possible, not just at an appropriate time, because I need to reiterate that sufficient time should be given for our members to scrutinize the information. Next, Mr. Sin Chung Kai. Chairman, I want to speak on para 9 and para 10 of the paper. Now, for the two power companies, in particular the CLP, what is the reserve capacity, roughly speaking? Second question, I don't know if you have considered the proposal of different charges for different time periods. For example, the peak consumption periods in a year has the largest effect on the average net fixed assets, ANFA. And for example, the hottest time of the day, the afternoon, will determine the tariff. Now my question is, for many users in Hong Kong, they use most electricity at the night time when they return home and turn on the air conditioners. So if we impose different charges for daytime and nighttime consumption, this will have a great impact on the tariff. And can this be done, or is it technically feasible, or will you consider it? The next point is about para 9. I've read it several times and I still don't get it. Is it the case that according to para 9, if the proposed increase is just 5%, the CLP can make this adjustment themselves, and for the increase exceeding 5%, ExCo's approval is required? Can you explain it, Secretary? Thank you, Mr. Sin, for the 3 questions. First, in relation to the backup electricity, I'll defer to my colleague Vivian. Second question, I will answer the question on the peak consumption periods. And third question, the increase of 5% and the relations with EXCO. I'll defer to Vivian. Now, first, when we discussed this issue with green groups and other stakeholders, we're concerned about the peak load or the peak consumption period. Can you, Secretary, can you speak into the microphone, please? Many cities and places are concerned about the peak consumption periods because it affects the overall investment in generation units. Of course, there is infrastructure to gauge the amount of consumption and to impose different charges for different periods, for example, summer. And we keep an open mind and we will continue to look into that. I'll defer the remaining 2 questions to Vivian. Chairman, first on the reserve capacity of the 2 power companies, I do not have this information at hand. It's roughly 30 to 50%. And at the beginning of this year, the 2 power companies, on LegCo's request, provided a paper on the reserve capacity of the 2 power companies. Perhaps I can supply this paper after the meeting for members' reference. Now, about this 30 to 50% reserve capacity, the paper explained that in relation to the 50% reserve capacity, the reason why it's relatively high. I can provide this paper after the meeting. Mr. Sim asked about para 9 of the paper, so let me explain this. Actually, there are 2 parts in our tariff structure. One is the basic tariff. The other is the fuel clause adjustment. As for this 5% mentioned here, if the proposed increase in basic tariff for the following year is within 5% of the estimated tariff approved by the EXCO in the prevailing development plan, then this 5% flexibility is given to these 2 power companies to increase the tariff without EXCO's approval. Next, Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Thank you, Chairman. Para 8 of the paper. Talks about the introduction of competition to the electricity market in 2008, then that seems to be a preamble. What is the government going to do so that the electricity market can be open to competition in 2018? In relation to the interim review, will some preparation be done on this front? Secretary. Now, thank you, Mr. Wu, for your question on stranded costs. You've pointed out correctly that we have a tight time frame. If there are substantial changes, it will affect other areas. And that's why when we discuss with green groups and academics, although the review is an interim one next year, in relation to the opening up of the electricity market in the long run, we have also started our discussion in relation to hardware and infrastructure constraints and how in the long run we can impose idealistic changes. And we are concerned about this, and we will start our discussion with the stakeholders as soon as possible.
Will the government have its plan? That is, before you negotiate for the new SCA in 2018, with regard to the interconnection between the 2 power companies, will that also be on the agenda? So do you have a timetable for that? With regard to interconnection or interconnectivity between the 2 power companies, I understand that there is a lot of concern in the community and the ACE, and even some stakeholders, when we talk to them, they also made similar suggestions. And of course, for the interconnectivity, that would also have other far-reaching implications, and therefore we will have to be very careful about it. But then we have this cautious attitude, so that during the interim review and in the course of renegotiating the SCA, we will be considering this very fully. Vivian, yes, under the current SCA, there are provisions because the current SCA will last for 10 years, that is from 2008 to 2018, and there is a provision in the SCA saying that the administration has the power, but then it's not a responsibility. So we can extend the agreement for another 5 years, and in 2018, if the market's regulatory framework changes, then before 2016, we will have to talk to the two power companies. In other words, next year, that's 2013, we will be undertaking this interim review. But then with regard to a comprehensive regulatory framework for the entire power market, in fact, shortly after the interim review, we will have to start that right away, because before 2016, we will have to take it up with the two power companies as regards the future power or electricity market, whether or not there will be substantial changes to the regulatory framework. So that's the timeline. All right, I'd just like to reconfirm that with regard to the regulation of the two power companies, the review will take place in 2016. You will have to do it before 2016, right? And there is already a very extensive consensus in the community. That is, for the two power companies, there should be interconnection. Is that right? So in this review, is that what the administration is going to do? Is that your attitude? That is, you'll be inclined towards allowing the two companies to interconnect? Or is it back to square one, that you will just be listening to views? Because it takes many years, and we have discussed that for many years, that there should be interconnection so that there can be increased competition, and there should also be more competition in the power market, and through this we will also be able to reduce tariff. So is that the administration stance? Thank you. Vivian, or Bureau Director? Well, with regard to interconnection, we do not have any fixed stance or preconceived stance. That's to make it clear. With regard to interconnectivity or interconnection, yes, we have talked to some academics, and there are pros, there are advantages, but then there are also other implications. Whether or not that will push down or drive down tariff, we are not sure. That's why we have an open mind. Next up, Mr. Charles Mock. Well, just now, some members refer to the progressive rates, and they said that with a progressively low rate or tariff, that would encourage the large users or enterprises to consume more. And I'm not in favor of it, because if you look at these enterprises or organizations, well, they include hospitals and even transportation companies, the MTRCL, and even for internet database. In fact, they've already done a lot in terms of environmental protection when compared to other sectors in the community. Even when compared to domestic users, they've spent a lot in energy efficiency, because if they do not do that, then they will actually be spending more. That's why there is every incentive on the part of these enterprises to cut down on power consumption. And also with regard to the usage time, because for many commercial organizations, including the databases, in fact, they would spread it out very evenly, and therefore they are not going to affect the average users during the peak consumption hours. And therefore, with this progressive scale in place, let's not forget that that would also be very important to economic development. And of course, this is also the economic development panel. Thanks to the chairman, even though I'm not a member, I've been allowed to speak here. And also for many of these organizations, many of them are from the industrial sectors. But then many of them are from the service sector, because we do not have many industries here in Hong Kong. And let's not forget that for service sector, including hospitals and also these service companies, they are actually providing services to the community. They are different from the industrial sectors, because it's not like that if they spend more, if they produce more, then they'll be able to make more profit. Indeed, actually they are providing services to the community. So I like to say that we will have to strike a balance between the demand and supply, and therefore what we need to do is that under our future policy, we will have to encourage the enterprises and even the households to do more energy saving. And if they are able to save more, then they will be able to enjoy the progressively low rate, or they'll also be able to enjoy more incentives so that they will be encouraged to save more. But then for household users, of course, that would be a lot more complicated. But then for the service sector and also for the commercial users, it will be easy to see if they've invested in energy efficiency devices. And therefore, can that be included in our policy so that we can provide more incentives for them to save energy consumption? So will we be introducing the energy efficient light bulbs? Will that be done again? Well, Mr. Charles Mock has provided another perspective in looking at the tariff scale, the relationship between the commercial sector and also the service sector. I'm grateful to that. I'm grateful to him for that. But then, with regard to what more can be done to encourage people to spend less, yes, that will definitely be included in our agenda. We will consider it. But then I'd just like to add this. Well, with regard to some databases, yes, they spend quite a bit of power, but then according to Mr. Mock, actually the utilization hours would be rather evenly spread out. But then if you look at the situation, well, in different seasons, for example, in winter, when the temperature is higher, well, actually, yes, the utilization hours would be rather even. But then in terms of the actual usage, that would also be higher, and therefore we will have to look at the situation. Yes, in terms of the functions, there has not been any change in summer, but then we will also have to reduce the demand during peak hours. So for different industries, well, the peak hour consumption consideration will also have to be considered in greater detail. Thank you. Next, Elizabeth Quat. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like the administration to respond to this point. Under the new thinking, with regard to the permitted return and also its pack to ENFA, will there be more substantial changes? That's number one. And number two, are you going to change the way the basic tariff is calculated, in particular the generator combination, because many members of the public are very concerned about this, because that would also have a huge impact on the tariff. And also the DAB has been asking that the administration should revise the SCA, the provision with regard to the EXCO's involvement in tariff increase. So even if it's less than 5%, it will have to go through EXCO. So what's the view of the administration on this? And recently, I've also read an article on the US. It says that the Obama government or administration in the future will be attaching importance to a new source of energy. And as a result of that, in the next 25 years, it will be sustainable in the US. So with regard to the introduction of new natural gas and also the development of new competition, so what's your view on this? And also just now, Mr. Charles Mock also talked about the use of power by databases. Well, but then for data centers, well, the international trend is that they will have green centers. So in Hong Kong, Hong Kong's databases are actually adopting the old approach, and therefore the power consumption would be higher. But then if they are able to introduce new technology, then according to some tests, they will be able to substantially lower power consumption. But of course, that would also require more investment. So would the administration be introducing new incentives and also new standards so that for Hong Kong's databases, they will be able to move on to the new era of green databases? Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Well, Ms. Quat basically has 5 questions. The first one is about the tariff structure. Number 2 is about the combination of different sources of fuel. And so I'll invite the Undersecretary to answer those questions. And also for the 4th issue, Obama said that with the new source of energy, that would that would affect the future operation of the power market. And also, it's about the new device or new technology for databases. Well, actually, Ms. Watt has discussed with us earlier on, because she's concerned that with more data centers in Hong Kong, how we're able to reduce power consumption by these data centers would also be one of her concerns. We are also very concerned about this, and we will see what we can do to help them save energy and boost economic development at the same time. So for the rest of the questions, I'll defer to the Undersecretary. Yes, I'll say a bit about the combination of different sources of energy. I'm sure you're all very interested in it. With regard to the different combination of sources of energy, we will have to use different perspectives in analyzing the situation as to the way forward. Well, number one, as we know, for LNG, indeed, the cost will be somewhat higher than coal. And if we have to import more nuclear power, then the price might also be somewhat higher than the coal-fired power. And therefore, the administration will have to explain this. That is, with regard to the proposed combination, the tariff, and also other implications. We will have to explain that very clearly to the public. If we just look at the tariff, whether or not it will go up, then we might not be able to see the whole picture. That is, with different combinations, that might also have implications or bring about different benefits for Hong Kong. For example, if we reduce the use of coal, then that would have a lot to do with our air pollution situation, and there will be changes, and that would also affect Hong Kong people's health. Moreover, some people might even say that, well, because we have a very bad situation with regard to air pollution, and that would also affect our overall international competitiveness. And if we can have all the figures and all the data available so that the combination of different sources of energy would affect our livelihood and our economy in different ways, and I would also invite more views from members. First, with regard to the combination of different sources of energy, that will affect the tariff. And number two, when the people have to pay for their power consumption, there might also be different views as to what type of user he is. And what we are all very concerned about is for domestic consumers or household users. And also, we will be most concerned about those who might be less able to afford it. So how are we able to help them? So that for those who are not able to afford it, then how are we able to help them? So it's different from what we're talking about, the benefits that might be brought about by a different combination of power sources. And therefore, at this stage, it's very difficult for us to move any further with regard to the long-term combination of different sources of energy and what the policy should be. But then in terms of the overriding principle, I think it's like what I said just now.
But many of my questions are still not answered. May I give him more time? Yes, the other question is on the future role of EXCO. I think that this is more appropriate if we discuss this only in interim review. That is, under the new mechanism, what will be the role of EXCO, or under the mechanism, what can be done to step up its role as the monitoring body? Or can the administration answer the question, or shall guess? Would you like to queue up again? Because if you ask too many questions, the secretary won't have time to answer all your questions. Mr. Yussi Wing. Chairman, I'd like to ask the administration what objective means they have in assessing the implementation of the SEA by the two power companies. For example, the permitted rate of return, the emission performance, the use of renewable energy, and the rationality in tariff increase, tariff stabilization fund, and similarly, after 2013, how will the administration assess under the assesses the SEA, will there be any different? Will there be any difference in extending the SEA, or will any introduction of new competitors be done? I'll defer to Vivian for a more detailed answer. Basically, when we discuss with different groups, these matters are also our concern, including tariff and use of renewable energy, etc. We keep an open mind. We will listen to all parties and set down our priorities. We assess the past performance for the smoother operation in the future. I'll defer to Vivian. Chairman, I think the members' concern is what criteria are being adopted in the interim review in assessing whether the clauses in the SEA are reasonable or not. Well, we can, in fact, discuss and review any clause under the SEA with the two power companies. One example is the permitted rate of return. Some members already expressed their views just now. Whether or not it's reasonable, it depends on a number of factors. For example, the economic environment, economic forecast, and the permitted rate or the rate of return for other industries. As for other clauses in the agreement, for example, tariff stabilization fund, actually during the negotiation over the annual review, every time the two power companies are required to submit information on the balance of the TSF, and we will look at the TSF and see if it's reasonable and whether they have exceeded breach any requirement under SEA. As for emission performance or emission standard, it's basically not under SEA. Actually, there is a technical memorandum under Air Pollution Control Ordinance which sets out very clearly the emission caps for different pollutants, and we assess their performance based on these caps. So we adopt this as the criteria of assessment. As far as the objectivity of the assessment is concerned, has the administration seek any views from the third party, or do they make their own judgment? Vivian. Now, like I said, in relation to the emission of pollutants, we already have statutory standards. In the technical memorandum, which, as I understand, have completed its legislative procedure at LegCo, and that is a new set of standards will be adopted starting from 2017. As for the permitted rate of return, whether it's high or low, we will seek professional advice from experts. Well, I can say that the objectivity is very important for the 5-year plan. Vivian, what about this 5-year? I'm sorry, can you ask the question again? All right, I just want to remind the administration that the coming 5 years is very important. So the administration should be concerned about the objectivity of assessment. Secretary. If in certain areas consultants or experts' objective advice is needed, then we understand that there is a need to seek such advice. Next. Well, some of the Mr. Frankie, Well, some of the members have raised some very good points about different charges for different time periods. I think this is also for the administration's consideration. Now, I believe that the administration would like to open up the electricity market in 2018, but to build a new power grid, it's not an easy job. Of course, you welcome newcomers to build generation units and be connected and with the existing power grid. But in terms of charges, I hope that the administration will pay attention to it in order to encourage fair competition. The third point about the combination of different sources of energy, Secretary, you already answered this question. I think your analysis is correct. But can we increase the ratio of nuclear energy in the fuel mix? Because if we are going to switch to natural gas, then the tariff will go up. And for the Daya Bay, well, of course, we have to consider the social costs as a whole, including air pollution. A member mentioned whether the tariff increase should go back to EXCO for approval. Well, I do have some reservations. If the investors do not have more solid basis for calculating the rate of return, and that EXCO's approval is required, this will have an impact on the sentiment of investment. Secretary, thank you for the views. First, on time-specific charges, that is during peak hours or during the summer, whether higher charges should be imposed. Well, some green groups have also raised this point, so we're going to put this on our agenda of discussion, and we're going to discuss with the two power companies. Now, in relation to the electricity supply market in 2018, we understand that this is a new experience, and we need to consider it thoroughly. Interconnectivity. According to overseas experience, new entrants should be given priority. Secretary, would you like to move the mic a bit so that people can hear more clearly? Thirdly, about fuel mix and the increase in the use of nuclear energy. Well, we have heard different views because there are voices in the community saying or asking whether we should increase the use of nuclear energy in Hong Kong. This is also our consideration. And this will definitely be on our agenda for discussion. But so far, we do not hold a particular stance. Point number 4, in terms of investment or business environment, the member asks for a better clarity and whether there should be more participation from EXCO, where we have heard this view. Next, Dr. Fernando Jiang. Electricity is not a choice, it's a necessity for our people. But electricity supply is subject to market mechanism and is being manipulated by the two power companies. The administration has a big role to play in terms of the monitoring of the two power companies. Over the past years, we have seen the two power companies proposing tariff increase using different excuses. And this tariff adjustment pegged to the average net fixed assets ANFA is the cause of the problem. They keep on inflating their assets so that they have justifications in proposing tariff increase. If we substantially increase the use of nuclear energy, and also as the use of LNG is getting more and more expensive, I have several concerns. First of all, if the use of nuclear energy is to be increased from 20 to 50%, I'd like to know what the administration intends to do to address the public's concern in relation to public safety and the relevant measures. If there are nuclear accidents, what contingency plan does Hong Kong have? And the Japanese incident is still clear in our minds. And the coal-fired energy will be reduced, but the two power companies have invested more than $10 billion in order to reduce the coal-fired generation units. So does it mean that these facilities will be left idle? I want to know whether the administration has a clear energy plan rather than in drips and drabs asking for reduction in emission and at the same time allowing power companies to build more generation units and then to be left idle. And last time, during the last tariff increase exercise, there was a great lack of transparency. They proposed increase in 3 areas. The CLP said that it was in accordance with the SEA, and I think that for the letters sent in by the two groups on the proposed establishment on a subcommittee to follow up on this matter or arrangement of a public hearing, I think that we should do that. And I state my position. I agree to that, and I think that we should set up a subcommittee to follow up on this matter. But I'd like the administration to answer my question on the fuel mix and the preventive and contingency measures on the use of nuclear energy. Secretary. Thank you, Dr. Zhang, for the questions. Dr. Zhang asked about the combination of different sources of energy and nuclear energy safety. I will defer to Undersecretary to supplement my answer. In terms of an energy plan, we need time to draft the plan, and for the details, I'll defer to Undersecretary. As for transparency, I understand that this is what the public wants, and we will continue with our work in this regard. Undersecretary, let me talk about the energy policy. Energy policy covers a very wide scope, as correctly pointed out by Dr. Zhang. It depends on the economic situation, and it has to do with our health. And now it also covers climate change. So it's a very wide policy. And we also have to observe the situation on the mainland. And our closest partner is Guangdong Province. Because, for example, we purchase nuclear energy from them. Apart from power generation, a comprehensive energy policy should include policies on, say, the use of fuel by transportation or vehicles. For example, whether there should be electric vehicles or what. I think we need more time. This term of government would like to have a more comprehensive policy, but we need more time.
Next, about nuclear power. Well, in Hong Kong, we do not have nuclear power generators ourselves. And therefore, within this region, the only nuclear power generators are located in Guangdong, and the most familiar one to us is Daya Bay because CLP has invested there, and it also have some management powers. But then, of course, it's still located in Guangdong, and elsewhere in Guangdong there are other nuclear power generators, and the central authorities have also decided that new power plants or nuclear power plants will also be built in Guangdong. Whether we buy it or not, we are all very concerned about the safety and management of nuclear power plants. And of course, to do it, we will have to work closely with Guangdong and also the Beijing government in order to enhance our understanding as to how the nuclear power plants work in terms of their management and safety. And within this term of government, we will spend more time to do it. And of course, on nuclear power, well, for what happened in Fukushima, yes, we will have to avoid it by all means. As to how that will be discussed worldwide and how we can avoid that from happening again, well, we can make some investment in order to avoid all disasters or accidents that could happen technically. So that is a principle which our state government, as far as I understand it, will be implementing it. But then it's a very complex issue, and I don't think I should go any further into it. But then if council members or other members of the community are interested in it, because we have been talking about nuclear energy, and there would be other forums for us to understand or look into it further. Alright, if we are not going to buy more nuclear power, we have 23% of power coming from nuclear power, and there is also a possibility for us to import more nuclear power from the mainland. So these are the options available to us. What sort of attitude should we adopt in looking at nuclear power? And I think Hong Kong people, what we need to do is to understand more about nuclear power. We should not just say that we are afraid of it and therefore we are not going to understand it or learn more about it. So I welcome opportunities to discuss with members. So we will have to enhance our knowledge on nuclear power before we make any decision on the way forward. Yes, Mr. Andrew Leung, I think the Bureau Director and the Undersecretary have already heard us, because the Federation of Hong Kong Industries have already indicated our stance, because there are many industries and sectors in the community that are actually driving our economic development, and I'm glad to hear from the Bureau Director that he will consider all these comprehensively. He will be looking at the full picture. But I'd like to ask this. Alright, there are people who are advocating for a progressive tariff whereby those who use more will have to pay more. So you will have to consult comprehensively, because everybody in Hong Kong will be interested in it. So it's like changing the power mix. I think we are all interested in it because we all have an interest in it. And I think with regard to the power mix, the administration will have to take the initiative to talk to different stakeholders. You will have to do it objectively. You will have to look at the implications on the economy and also the impact on the environment and so on. And I agree with the Undersecretary in the sense that we will have to enhance our understanding on nuclear power. Yes, the Fukushima incident is a very unfortunate incident, but then what are the causes of it? We still do not know very much about it. But then, according to geologists on the mainland, there are also risks of according to some geologists, it's not possible for earthquakes to take place on the mainland or tsunami to take place because of the continental shelf. And I understand that during the night time you will have to shut all or turn off all the lights. But then Hong Kong is a tourist city, and we also have to look at the peak demands, because during night time, when the peak demand is not that low, even if you turn off all the lights, the power companies will still have to continue to run, and therefore Well, Bureau Director, I understand that you do have a lot of knowledge about this, and you will have to share your knowledge with the community. Yes, you will have to do different things, and there are also different sources of pressure, but then how are you going to strike a balance? I'm sure that's the duty of the administration, and therefore my question is, how are you going to take the lead in the discussion? Bureau Director. Chairman, I'm grateful to Mr. Andrew Leung for his comment and also his question. Mr. Leung said that in terms of power consumption and the economy, there are different considerations, for example, used by the industries and also the power mix, and also during night time, how should tariff be set and so on. We will have to talk to different stakeholders and the community at large. And our timetable is that, we will have a more focused interim review next year. And of course, you will understand that, in the end, any discussion or any agreement will have to be agreed by both sides. And also for the future power mix, and also in 2016, we will have to decide on the changes to the SCA in 2018. That will also give us a bit more room to discuss it. And therefore, we will have the next 2 or 3 years to comprehensively look at all the views. So please rest assured, we'll take on board all the views. Let me put it bluntly. That is with regard to the change of the tariff structure, whether it will be progressively more expensive or what. So you will not just be doing that after you have reached an agreement and then in January without any detailed consultation, because you will be affecting many jobs. Bureau Director, yes, I'm grateful to Mr. Leung for his views. I'm sure, as many members have suggested, for commercial users, including industrial users, with regard to the progressive tariff for big users, we have heard different views, and we have heard that this is not this is a complex issue. So we should not just be charging people who use more higher tariff, and therefore we will have to spend more time on discussing it. It's not a simple matter. But then I'm sure you all understand that given the complexity of the issue, we cannot possibly do anything overnight. Yes, concerning the knowledge of nuclear energy, we will have to enhance the knowledge, and we will have to have more discussion. Because in Hong Kong, we simply do not have any nuclear power plant, and all the nuclear energy is imported. And therefore, it's not just our problem. It's the problem of the source of supply. And Mr. Leung also referred to the geology and what impact there might be. I'm sure we all would like to know more about this, and in due course, I'll be more than happy for the Undersecretary or for the Secretary, if you are ready, then we can also have a briefing for our members and even members of the public, so that they will know more about the safety of nuclear energy and also the impact on the environment. Next, Mr. Lam Kwok Hong, Chairman. Well, being sincere and honest, it has become very much a platitude. And if the administration or the CLP would like us to know more, then I think a precondition is to deploy more resources for the public. And I suggest that the CLP should spend some money, or the administration should allow the opponents to have adequate resources so that they can collect more data. For example, after you have charged your tariff, and a certain percentage should be taken out for the civil society to set up an opposition fund, I think it's reasonable. So it's like playing chess, because initially I had luck, but then now we have computer devices, and you also have the attackers and also the defender, and it's not a question of distributing the cards, and that might also give rise to some unfair results. I think in Hong Kong we should also consider giving people or your opponents the money so that they can stage opposition against you. So that's point number one. And number two, in Hong Kong, what can we do to avoid having a nuclear disaster? I think, of course, you can do it. You can just jump into the sea. Does the CLP have the ability to set up an underground city for Hong Kong people? No, of course not. Therefore, we should be staunchly against the building or construction of any nuclear power plants near us. And this is, of course, you might say that this is selfish. It's like what Mr. Andrew Liang said, whether or not there would be a tsunami. It's like Chernobyl. It doesn't take a tsunami to result in a Chernobyl incident. And therefore, well, if there is any mistake committed by human, then there would be disasters. And therefore, for human mistakes or man-made mistakes, that's inevitable. But then once a mistake is made, the consequence would be irreversible. That's why we're against nuclear power. Secondly, well, after you've used nuclear power, then actually you're encouraging the development of nuclear armament. Or else, why do we have to develop nuclear energy? Because once you have nuclear energy, you'll be building nuclear bombs. So I'm staunchly against nuclear energy. And if you continue to buy nuclear power from the mainland, you're actually encouraging the mainland to develop nuclear power. You're actually encouraging them to do it. And if they just continue to build it, then who will be buying nuclear power from them? And therefore, as a city of China, Hong Kong has the knowledge, and therefore we should say no to it. Or else, if anything untoward happens, then everybody will be crying, or the CE would just say that sorry, it's a lapse of memory. No, that would not work. Whether or not a city has its soul is very important, and therefore we should do what is right. And also, next about commercial uses and so on, CLP has been criticized. Well, I think CLP is a bad guy, but then I'm not saying things good for it. But then the fact that there are many people who are criticizing it, that's because many people would like to introduce operators from the mainland. But then if you're criticizing CLP, then you might be introducing an even worse guy, which will be an even worse operator. But then as to what the CLP should do, well, for those who use more, they will be paying less. I don't think that's right, because we are against pollution, right? Mr. Lang Kwok Hong, would you like the officials to respond to that? There is no need for them to respond. I'll just make my comments. Well, for the low users, in particular, those using power for survival, they should be charged less. They should be charged very low cost. That's the responsibilities of the enterprises. And only the high users should be charged more, because they are polluting the environment, and they are insisting on polluting the environment even though they use more. So they will have to pay more. It's fair. As regards the high cost, well, please, come on. Well, if you ask Li Ka-shing, well, how about the rentals and so on? So, well, for areas that are most frequently patronized by people, then of course he'll be charging higher rents. Well, so we should not be subsidizing the high users.
Secretary, any response to this view? Chairman, Mr. Lang, your view is noted. Dr. Kenneth Chan. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think between the interim review and the opening up of the electricity market in 2018, these two things are intertwined. We cannot just focus our discussion on the interim view, because it, as clearly pointed out in the paper, any adjustment is subject to a mutual agreement between the power companies and the government. So what we can do is just minor adjustments. But if we're to impose big changes, we should start here in the interim review. Otherwise, our hands will be bound, and the views expressed by green groups and the community won't be taken on board in the review. And I hope the administration will not just say that they keep an open mind, so on and so forth. They should take a firmer role in leading the community in changing the energy mix and reducing emission and having a say on the permitted rate of return, so that even during the interim review with the two power companies, there will be more good news for green groups and the public. Secondly, I understand that it's very simple. If you allow a permitted rate of return of 9.99%, they will base the calculation on the 9.99% so that at the end they get 9.99% return. It's very unfair for users, in particular domestic users. And therefore, we're having a debate on whether we should adopt a progressive or regressive tariff structure. I think we should introduce affordability in our discussion, because the power companies have all the data on the consumption habits of users, the charges, and the peak hours concerned. If this information can be made public for our discussion and the discussion in the community, then the users will know whether the two companies are looking after their interests as well. We're talking about poverty line and welfare matters. We don't want the two power companies to maximize their profit and offer little rebate in order to address the problem. If the administration is determined enough, they should start their work in this regard right away. Now, next point about stranded costs. Stranded costs should be taken into consideration as set out in the paper. And a member just asked about stranded costs, and according to the paper, there is an international practice in this regard. So is it the case that we have already make reference to international practices, and in the event of stranded costs, how will this be dealt with so as to protect the public and the public money? Secretary, thank you, Dr. Chan, for your question. 3 questions, in fact. I'll defer to Vivian to answer the third question. For the first 2 questions, I basically agree with Dr. Chan. We understand that there are constraints in the interim review, but it's time that we allow the discussion to start on energy mix and emission reduction. All these are of our concern, and we would like to set up a framework for discussion as soon as possible so as to forge a consensus. As for stranded costs, I'll defer to Vivian to answer this question. Chairman. Now, Dr. Chen asked about stranded costs. Let me briefly explain it. In 2018, the administration may introduce changes in the structure of the electricity market if existing power companies, in terms of their assets or agreements that have already been signed, for example, purchase of fuel, and as a result they cannot recover their costs. They can recover the cost from the market. This is so-called the stranded cost. But we have clearly stipulated in our agreement that before they recover from the market the stranded costs, they must introduce measures to minimize stranded costs as required by the government. For example, if there are agreements already signed, can they be switched to the new entrant? And for example, power generation units, can the surplus generation units be assigned to the new supplier? Well, we will look at the actual circumstances by then and decide what the government should do. But should this happen, the administration will discuss with the incumbent power companies the relevant arrangements and the levels. Next, Mr. Michael Tin. Before I invite Mr. Michael Tin to speak, does any other member wish to speak? Otherwise, I'll draw a line here. Chairman, can you tell us the order? For those who have yet to speak, Michael Tin, Paul Chair, Ma Fong Kwok, Chung Pok Pam, Ronnie Tong, Sit Ho. WK and myself. We should end this item by 10:50. So I'll see how much time I will give members for second round. Michael Tin. Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I came in late. If the questions have been answered, you don't need to answer my question. We're changing the fuel mix from 2350 to 2340 and 5410. So in relation to the cost of natural gas and coal, if the fuel mix is changed from 2350 to 2340 and then 54 to 10, what will be the change in our tariff? For this idealistic mix, how much does our consumers have to bear? As I understand, the Yacheng contract will end very soon, and then there will be a new contract or new agreement. Will there be a substantial increase in prices so that in the future the use of natural energy will attract a higher cost? Thirdly, I am somewhat different from Mr. Leung Kwok Hong in terms of the CLP. In France, they use 70 to 80% nuclear energy, and nothing, no accident happened. So it all depends on management. I'd like to know, for the nuclear plants on the mainland, the CLP also takes part in management. So does the administration have the confidence that we will be able to meet the safety coefficient? We should not dodge the issue. The other point, there is a 50-kilometer radius safety zone. There are nuclear plants due to be opened in southern China, and the evacuation zone is 100 kilometers. Have we explored this issue? I mean, safety is of paramount importance. I agree with Mr. Leung Kwok Hong that if we buy more nuclear energy from them, this will encourage them to build more. So my question is whether the safety level is acceptable and whether we can reach out to farther places. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Tin, for 3 questions. The first 2 questions have to do with the tariff. That is, if we adopt different energy mix, what will be the impact on costs? And we're going to have east-west natural gas transmission. I will defer to my colleague to give a detailed answer. Third question. Nuclear energy. It must be reasonably priced, safe, etc. There are 4 principles. I'll defer to Vivian. Yes, Vivian? Would you like to take the questions? Mr. Tin asked about the energy mix. At present, 50% is coal-fired, 25% natural gas, and 25% nuclear energy. And in the consultation paper on climate change, the so-called 541 proposal and the relevant impact on our tariff, in fact, in the consultation paper, it's already been stated that in terms of estimating the costs, there are constraints because, as we know, among all other sources of energy, natural gas is the most expensive. Coal is relatively cheaper. Nuclear energy supplied by the Daya Bay nuclear plant is relatively the same as the cost for fuel, the cost for coal. So I'm sorry, I'm afraid that there is no time. I'm just asking for the present price, the current prices, and the current costs. You should have this information. If you can't answer this question now, please provide this information after the meeting. Can you answer this question right now? I'll defer to Ms. Yao to answer this question. Ms. Yao. The nuclear energy price as today is 50%. But Mr. Tin asked a question about the cessation of service from Yacheng, and this will be replaced by west-east gas transmission. And I can say that definitely the price is higher. So on the 11th of December, when we start the tariff review discussion, this will be a more appropriate time to discuss this point. Now, about the suspension of supply of gas from Yacheng, you're going to discuss that later. But what about the proposed increase according to the new energy mix? You don't even have the figures. Like I said, there are a lot of constraints because we cannot make our estimates based on the new supply of new source of nuclear energy, and facilities are required. And I already said that we need to have a detailed calculation. Mr. Porcher. Well, every time when we approach Christmas, we talk about the tariff increase by the two power companies. Last time, the matter was stirred up quite substantially, and we need to talk about this 3 times. And 12 months ago, this council, in relation to the incompetence of the administration in its negotiation with the two power companies, the electrical, passed a motion and even threatened to use the PNP to investigate the power companies. And in the end, the administration managed to get some information from them. I believe that we're going to face the same problem again. Some questions for the administration. First, on the tariff adjustment mechanism and the capital investment to which is pegged. I think that this should be reviewed as soon as possible, because if our remuneration is also pegged to the time we speak in the council, then, well, Mr. Leung Kwok-hong is filibustering, so we'll definitely get a pay rise. Now, about the increase by the two power companies, it's definitely not reasonable.
And for investors coming to Hong Kong, at least with regard to interconnection between the two power companies in Hong Kong, I think in the interim review, you should try to do a bit more so that there can be more cooperation between the two power companies, and that would also reduce the cost of investing in new power generators, and that would also increase fairness. So even if we are not able to have a multi-party system, then at least we can have more democracy. So there will be better competition in Hong Kong. So I'd like to know a bit more from the Bureau Director. All right, in 2012, on the 28th of January, it passed a number of motions, including the establishment of a power or energy council, and also the review of the power mix, and also we should also increase the supply of information or dissemination of information by the two power companies. So I'd like to know, 12 months have passed. So with regard to the 3 motions that have been passed, what have you done so far? And also upcoming, we have this interim review, and there will be an agreement on the interim review. So has the administration got anything in mind so that in the next 5 years we'll be able to get the two power companies to agree to this so that there will be overall improvement to the situation? Bureau Director. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your questions. I think your questions cover a very broad scope. We'll be taking the opportunity of the interim review, and also between now and 2016, we will have to prepare for the signing of a new agreement with the two power companies. So we'll be covering all the issues that you're concerned about. So that's the timeline. And of course, for the time being, by the end of this year, we'll be reviewing the tariff adjustment by the end of the year, and that's the most pressing issue. And then in 2013, we have the interim review. And then between now and 2016, we will also have to look at how the future SCA should be signed and how enhancements can be included. I think that's all I can say for the time being. Yes, Mr. Ma Fong Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. I have two questions that are related to the environment. If you look at the current tariff structure, from the environmental perspective, there is no incentive whatsoever. The administration has been calling upon the public to save energy, and many people, including myself, we have all switched to energy efficient devices, light bulbs, and so on. But then if you look at the SCA, well, still there is a permitted rate of return of 9.99%, assuming that tomorrow, whether they are businessmen or household users, they all work very hard to reduce the use of energy. But then in terms of the power companies, there is no pressure whatsoever. They will still be able to get the 9.99 rate of return in increasing tariff. So whatever efforts that have been made or put into saving energy is not going to achieve any benefit at all. And therefore, during the interim review, will there be mechanisms that you can consider so that under the agreement, there can be more incentives for people to spend less, so that overall speaking, we will not be paying very much the same tariff to the power companies. And also, next, turning to nuclear power. I don't want to make things complicated. In fact, what Mr. Leung Kok Hong just said was precisely my concern. We are using nuclear power, but then is it 100% safe? Nobody can tell us that. And for the time being, if we still use nuclear power, what's the benefit? Because if you look at today's prices, well, basically it's more or less the same as coal-fired generators. But then at the same time, in using nuclear power, we might be encouraging mainland operators to build more. So that's one consideration. And second consideration is, under the circumstances, if the power company is going to use more nuclear power, then after they have resorted to nuclear power, how are we going to deal with the original surplus capacity, including generators in Hong Kong, and also the energy that we have managed to save in Hong Kong, and also with regard to the supply from elsewhere, there might also be a reduced demand from Hong Kong. So what is going to happen to that? But then in para 10, you said that with regard to the cost, that will only be dealt with at the time of the commissioning of the plant. So the excess generating capacity will only be calculated at the commissioning point. So this is very much in conflict. So will there be any mechanism in place to deal with that in the interim review? For example, in the future, we might not have to use local generators to supply the energy. We'll be using imported energy, and that might be cheaper than using local generators. So what is going to happen? How are we going to deal with those excess generating capacity? Bureau Director, there are two aspects. Number one, the environmental consideration. I'd just like to clarify this point. That is, for the time being, for any individuals or companies or groups, if they're able to reduce emission, then in terms of the tariff, that would be fully reflected. Under the existing tariff structure, they'll be able to save money. So that's the current situation. So what Mr. Ma was saying, that is, we have 7 million people in Hong Kong, and if everybody works together to save money or to save energy, then for the time being, even if they are able to save energy, they might not be able to save the expenditure. Well, that's just an assumption. So that's an assumption that everybody will be working towards saving energy. Well, in the interim review and even in the longer term, how are we going to encourage energy efficiency? So we will have to work out how that can be done. For example, other than energy devices or electrical devices, we will also have to see how we can reduce emission and energy consumption in our buildings and so on. Those would be the issues that we'll be looking into. With regard to the safety of nuclear power and how we are going to invest in the power generators and so on, I'm sure, yes, that's very much your concern, but then please rest assured that is for the time being. We have not given approval for the two power companies to expand their assets. We will be very cautious in that. We'll be serving as a gatekeeper, but then of course we will have to see what we can do in the future SCA. In fact, I don't think my two questions have been answered. Alright, for if you use an LED light bulb, actually you're paying 15-20 times more than an ordinary light bulb. But then for the energy that will be saved, you're not able to offset it with the cost of an LED light bulb. Yes, well, for nuclear power, well, the importation cost would be lower. But then for the power generators locally, even if you suspend the operation of those generators, you will still have to pay for that. Well, for the energy efficient devices and installations, there is a quicker return period. For example, for an LED light bulb, you should be able to recover the cost within a matter of several years. So I think that's still economical. I'll defer the rest to the Undersecretary. Mr. Ma also asked a rather complex issue. That is, for example, for our coal-fired generators, if we want to phase them out because we have to use more natural gas or nuclear power, then what is going to happen to the stranded cost? How would that be dealt with? Well, I don't think we'll be able to just give you a very quick answer. But then when we look at the energy policy and also the mix of energy, we will have to look into it. And several members have also said this, and I'd like to respond to that. That is, well, on the mainland, for the natural gas that we can get and also nuclear power that we can get from the mainland, we should not have this misconception that whatever we want, we'll be able to get it. Because the mainland is also having this severe shortage of power. In Guangdong, they are also having this power shortage, and therefore, even if we want to buy it, we may not be able to get it. And it's not true to say that whenever we want to buy more nuclear power, they'll have excess nuclear power to sell to us. So please do not have the misconceived idea that whatever we want to buy, we'll be able to get it. And so members, please rest assured, we'll be looking into it. And in the long run, in the review, that is in the next round of the SCA, these are the issues that we'll be touching on, and there'll be sufficient time for us to communicate with the community and members. Next, Deputy Chairman, thank you. I have several questions. Number one, on stranded cost. My understanding is that, well, the two power companies will be viewing this as the cost that they are not able to retrieve. And in 2018, according to the PAS, there might be some changes to the structure. And as a result of such structural reforms, will that result in stranded costs incurred by the two power companies? I'd like to know this. And second, on the tariff stabilization fund, what is the current balance? So how will that impact upon the upcoming tariff review? What can it achieve? And also, thirdly, on energy efficiency, Mr. Ma was asking about the incentives. So, well, I'm sure the two power companies have already set up a fund to help the enterprises to install energy efficiency devices, and in 5 years' time, the two power companies should have set up this stabilization fund, and there should already be certain funds accumulated in it. So to what extent have they been able to achieve the desired purposes? Thank you, for the 3 questions. For the first one, I'll ask Vivian to answer. And then for the third question, with regard to the incentives adopted by the 2 power companies to encourage the non-government organizations to conserve energy. Well, I think we can provide the details later. Yes, Vivian. Chairman, on stranded cost. Well, in 2018, if the local electricity market has experienced a structural change, what does that mean? Well, of course, there are many possibilities, and one of them is, as I've heard today, will we be opening up the electricity market? At present, we have 2 power companies. So we only have 2 power companies now in Hong Kong, and after 2018, are we going to adopt this SCA approach in regulating the power supply market in Hong Kong, or are we going to adopt a new approach in regulating the electricity industry in Hong Kong, and that would also include different components, for example, in terms of power generation, power supply, and also distribution of power and the sale of electricity and so on. There are different components, and as I said just now, before 2016, we will have to talk to the 2 power companies to see if Hong Kong has the right conditions to introduce more competition in the market, so that there might be changes to the electricity market. And if there are such changes, then we will have to look at the implication for the 2 power companies, whether or not it will impact their investment or the contracts that they might have entered into. And if that's the case, then the provision or the clause on stranded costs will be triggered, and then we will have to look at the requirement imposed by the administration on the 2 power companies to reduce the stranded costs, and for the excess stranded costs that will also have to be recovered through the market. But then for the time being, we haven't really completed the regulatory framework review, and therefore for the structural changes that I just set out, we haven't yet come to the stage whereby we will have to consider those measures. Finally, about the stabilization fund. Well, with regard to the tariff stabilization fund, the reason why there is a balance in the fund, that's because in a particular year, if the 2 power companies, with regard to what they charge in terms of tariff, if is more than the cost, and also if it's in excess of the permitted return, then the shareholders will not be able to share that out or pocket it, and that will have to be put into the stabilization fund, so that in the coming years, if there is any tariff increase, then they can also deploy the balance from the stabilization fund in order to reduce the tariff increase for the following year. So that's how it operates. Yes, I understand that, but then I'm asking how much is left in the fund, and if there is any excess or surplus, then how would that help in reducing the tariff increase? I think we'll have to leave that to the next meeting when we talk about the 2013 tariff increase. We'll be dealing with that. So we'll be giving you all the details next time. Mr. Ronnie Tong? With regard to the interim review under the SCA, I think it's not very meaningful if it can only be done under the SCA, because basically we are at the mercy of the power companies, and therefore we will have to look at the long term. And of course, the most important thing is in 2018 and 2019, how we're able to deal with power supply in Hong Kong.
Chairman, my first question is this. The administration have once said that the administration will enact legislation to replace the SCA. Is the administration determined to do that? Because this enactment of legislation will act as the gatekeeping so that we can monitor the 2 power companies rather than the arrangement of having SCAs now. Now, next question about the introduction of competitors into the electricity market in 2018. So what is the thinking? I think the logic should be that we have interconnectivity of power grids in Hong Kong, Kowloon, and the New Territories before we introduce competitors into the market. Does the administration agree to this strategy? And thirdly, if this is the approach that we should take, we should start now. We should, notice the two power companies in advance, so that we won't see something similar to what's happening to the TV market now. When the administration wants to issue new licenses, the existing TV stations say that no, this cannot be done, etc. So this is the right time for us to use this interim review to tell the two power companies that they will face competition in as early as 2018. We're going to open up the electricity market and connect the power grids. Before we talk about stranded costs, if we give the wrong message to the two power companies that they can continue to monopolize the market, then they may be acting like the ATV now, that they're going to wage a war to fight against competition. So on these 3 points, I hope that the administration would have a frank discussion with us. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Tong, for your questions. As you correctly put it, even though this is an interim review, we need to look at things in the long term. Now, whether legislation will be enacted to replace the SEA, this is a substantial change. There are advantages, and this is something for our consideration. We will put it in our agenda. But most importantly, I'm going to really look into it and start a discussion. We keep an open mind. Well, don't say in reply that you're going to keep an open mind. Of course, if we have the right to enact legislation, we won't be asking you, but you are the bureau in charge, so you must say something other than keeping an open mind. So, Secretary, you have listened to all the views during consultation. Well, there are other mainstream views which will also be taken into consideration, but there is a voice on this matter. In terms of strategy, we will give due consideration according to this view. In the long run, we need to consider what is the best strategy for Hong Kong in monitoring the two power companies. Well, this is what we are seriously considering. Between 2013 and 2016, definitely sufficient time and notice will be given to the two power companies. For the connection of power grids, well, in fact, there is nothing outstanding for consideration. You can implement this in the short term. Is that true? Well, we need to consider the agreements, and technically, and we are facing constraints, and my colleague can supplement on this. In terms of technical matters, we need to make certain arrangements. Chairman, what about the third question? Are you already discussing with the two power companies the introduction of competitors in the market? I think there is quite a clear voice in the community already for the two power companies in relation to competition. What are the pros and cons of introducing competition, and what's the impact on two power companies? All these should be clearly set out. Sometimes, according to overseas experience, the introduction of competition may not induce changes in favor of tariff adjustments for customers' sake. But do you agree that interconnectivity of power grids is the first step, that we should link up the power grids in Hong Kong and Kowloon first? Well, we understand that we need to make technical arrangements for interconnectivity. As for the advantages of interconnectivity, I believe that in the coming year we will make it clear to the public. Sit home. Over the past year, through oral and written questions, the administration has given a reply. An interim review would be conducted in 2018. The negotiation with the two power companies will be completed by 2016, followed by introduction of competition in 2018. So when an interim review is conducted in 2013, will public consultation be conducted right away? Otherwise, if they come up with their own arrangement and negotiate with the two power companies, the community may hold a different view. And in the event of this happening, will there be sufficient time for you to negotiate with the two power companies? Because there are technical and political considerations. The second question is about the permitted rate of return. The two power companies have different market size, different facilities, and different size of power grid, and they impose different rates of tariff. And if we are really serious about introducing competition, how many new entrants are we talking about? 3 or 4? And will there be permitted rate of return for these new entrants? Now, about long-term investment and efficiency in emission performance, and are we going to apply the same standard? If it's the same standard, then it's again 9.99%. From another perspective, has the administration discussed with the two power companies to push down further this 9.99%? Last time we were able to reduce the rate of return from 13.5% to 9.99%. The previous rate was outrageous, but there is still room to further reduce the rate from 9.99%. So has the administration discussed with the two power companies? Secretary. Just to answer briefly, we understand that we have a tight time frame, and we should start the interim or the medium and long-term discussion as soon as possible. We support the direction of increasing transparency in the consultation with stakeholders. Now, when we discuss with green groups and stakeholders and professionals, I think that we agree that in the medium and long term, we should focus on its review. I think this is the direction. Chairman, it seems that he hasn't given a concrete answer at all, because you're conducting an internal review until 2013. You have also commissioned a consultant. So have you told the consultant what your direction will be? Because it's for you to set down a framework. So can you engage the public and discuss the framework? And secondly, I'd like the administration to refrain from using the word stakeholders. Are you only talking about the two power companies or the companies and the community? And does the community cover domestic users and the business and commercial users? If you only say stakeholders, I demand a clearer answer from Secretary. And about this permitted rate of return of 9.99%, if we introduce more competitors in the market, are they going to follow the same formula or different formula when you negotiate the tariff with the new entrants? If there is a new formula, why can't you negotiate with the two existing power companies as well? Secretary. We will come up with a framework, and in due course, in 2013, we will report to LegCo our framework. So members can be reassured we will do that in due course, but we need time to collate views and formulate the framework. We have heard members' views. In due course, we will come up with a framework and the relevant arrangements. As for the rate of return, as said just now, under the present economic environment, this seems to be on the high side. So when we introduce competitors into the market, there will be an aspiration for the rate of return to be reduced. So to answer your question, briefly, when we introduce competition to the market, we will see whether there will be any positive impact on environmental protection, etc. And according to the existing mechanism, it will be a rational mechanism. Now, different members expressed concern about the use of natural gas and the impact on the tariff. So the number one question is whether we have a new source of natural gas and how can the supply be assured. Now, for Yacheng, we understand that the supply will be suspended. As for East or West East natural gas transmission, well, a member already asked a question, so I won't repeat that. But it seems that the agreement still hasn't been signed, so I'd like to know the timetable. We understand that coal and natural gas comes from fossils, and it's not a renewable energy source. And Hong Kong does not have any natural gas wells or any fossil fuel resources. So whether we should buy nuclear energy or natural gas, well, it's not really up to us. And the supply of natural gas is actually limited. And I'd like to know, overall speaking, the progress. Of course, it's the responsibility of the two power companies to undertake operation and supply of energy. But in terms of the direction in the long term and safeguarding the public's interest, the administration should be responsible. And I'm very concerned about this. And our professional sectors are very concerned about this as well. We want to join hands and come up with a good strategy in the long term. Thank you, Mr. Lo Wai-kwok, for your question. Now you talk about source of energy and nuclear energy and energy mix. Now a brief answer is that in the near future we're going to sit down and have a discussion on the nuclear energy in Hong Kong. Next point about the West East natural gas transmission agreement, we are striving for the signing of agreement by the end of this year. By the end of this year, excuse me, do you mean before the end of December? So it's just a month away. I mean within the end of this year. I have a few questions for Secretary as well. I think review is necessary, but we also need to know our way forward. This is the general public's concern. We need to concern about the affordability of the public, and we are concerned whether the new policy will affect the business environment in Hong Kong. Secretary, you said that you will balance all the suggestions, for example, for the progressive tariff structure. According to the business sector, they are already striving hard to preserve some of the industries in Hong Kong. And if you introduce a progressive tariff structure, they may stop their business because they need more electricity in order to produce more, and if they are charged more, they may not be able to afford it. As for the introduction of natural gas, my question is, first of all, in terms of supply, globally, countries are battling for these resources. So is it really the case that we can get supply very easily at a very low cost? We need natural gas supply to improve our environment. So should we use a company to secure natural gas supply for it to be sold to the affiliated power companies, because they already reap a profit in between? Should it be subject to monitoring by the administration, because it will also affect the tariff?
And also for the sectional tariff, yes, you might be telling the industries that they should not be producing during certain time periods, and then they should resort to other time segments in doing the production. I think you will have to consult widely before you introduce this. And also, earlier on, I also talked to the former Bureau Director, Mr. Yao, and Mr. Andrew Leung and myself also went to Beijing to meet with the Minister of Energy, and we also talked about this. And in the wake of the Fukushima incident, they said that they would look into the nuclear power plant again. It doesn't mean that they would be halting the whole program, but then to them, safety is always the first and foremost consideration. And as far as Hong Kong is concerned, we do not necessarily have to buy nuclear power from them. But then I understand that we might be considering buying nuclear power from the Taishan plant. But then I understand that nuclear power is a rather stable source of power supply, and is also rather cheap and safe. But then when you come up with the report, you will have to be pragmatic. You should not raise the expectation of the community, because for the two power companies in particular, the CLP, they have actually got room for downward adjustment. In fact, it's a delayed payment. It's not really a tariff reduction. So you will have to consider that very carefully. So please do consider the questions that I've asked. Yes, thank you, Chairman. I agree with your concerns. That is, with regard to our power tariff, we will have to take care of different aspects, including how we can improve air quality, because that would affect public's health. And also, we have to bear in mind the affordability of the public. We will also have to maintain a stable business environment, and at the same time, we have to encourage energy efficiency, and therefore, everything will have to do with our policy. We will have to strike a balance between all these factors. So we'll bear that in mind. And also on the use of natural gas. Number one, we have this West-East transmission, and that will also come to Hong Kong, and that will help maintain a steady supply of LNG to Hong Kong, because for Yachang, the gas is going to be exhausted very soon. And for the West-East supply, Vivian might also wish to supply or supplement on the details. With regard to the new contract, well, recently we also went to Beijing and Guangdong. We also had a courtesy visit, and we will be reporting to you the details in due course. So, Vivian, can you supply further information on the West-East gas supply program? Well, with regard to the West-East supply, we will have to look at the price when they commission the services. We've already engaged an independent consultant who will be looking into it. And at this stage, I'm afraid I'm not able to disclose the details here. And as the Bureau Director said, we expect that the approval can be given by the end of this year, and we'll be coming to this council to give you all the details. All right, we have 3 members who have asked to speak in the second round, so I'll be giving you each 3 minutes. Tan Kap-yew, Sin Chung Kai, and Elizabeth Quat. First, Tan Kap-yew. Thank you, Chairman. Concerning what I said just now, concerning the tariff structure, the progressive scaling rate, for those who are familiar with the operation, they have certain views. I think those will not affect the concerns that have been expressed about this issue. So, can we just single out the highest 100 consumers or 500 consumers? Can we look into it? All right. When you try to regulate the 2 power companies in setting up or installing some assets, well, you would not be giving approval to those that are not necessary. But then in terms of power consumption, would the same principle apply? Some refer to the databases. Well, the FTU agrees that the administration should keep certain industrial developments or some enterprises by resorting to certain policies. But then for people or enterprises that have been abusing this, for example, in shopping centers, and also for excessive use of like signboards and so on, well, we will have to be concerned about this. Therefore, we will have to conduct studies, or else it might be just empty talk. You will have to look at the top users to see if they have used power excessively. And also, as the Secretary said, that some of the information is available in an annual report. But then, the more we discuss it, the clearer the picture. So, whether or not whether or not the reserve capacity being set at 30 to 50% is necessary, and also we are actually buying nuclear power. I don't know whether it's cheap to buy nuclear power, but then at the moral level, I think if we can afford to use less, the better. So why can't we do a bit more in this respect? You have not given us the figures. You have not given us the details. So can you give him more time to answer your questions, Bureau Director? Yes, I'm grateful to Mr. Tang for his questions. I think your questions are very constructive. With regard to the progressive rate, should it be apply to all companies? It might not be the most reasonable approach, and therefore we'll have to conduct studies. And as you've just suggested, we will have to sample the top users to see if that's the case. So we'll do it. All right. For the next question, I'll defer to Vivian. Well, as I was attempting to answer the question with regard to the reserve capacity, actually, worldwide, it depends on the local circumstances. I think they have got this standard. About 30% is the right level. As regards whether they need to have this reserve capacity, that's because we might be concerned that during the peak consumption period, if a particular generation unit, if they are not able to operate or function, then we will have to ensure that the supply will be normal, so that the public will not be adversely affected. And therefore, to have this reserve capacity is not unique to Hong Kong. In fact, worldwide, in the electricity market, all the operators will have this. As regards whether 30% or 50% is the right level, as I said, the yardstick is about 30%. That would be more or less appropriate. But then, as I said, there is a power company with 50% reserve capacity. It already explained to this council earlier on as to why it needs to keep this 50% reserve capacity. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that in the power mix we do not have to make any changes. At present, about 25% is from nuclear power. In fact, the two do not have this offsetting mechanism. It doesn't mean that with the reserve capacity we'll be able to generate power, and therefore we do not have to buy nuclear power. I think it's rather technical, and therefore I do not propose to give you all the details here. But then with regard to the large consumers, in particular the commercial users, in fact, under the Building Energy Efficiency Ordinance, that only came into effect in September this year, and under that ordinance, Well, there would have to be an energy audit for all the commercial buildings, and the relevant commercial buildings will also have to put up displays in conspicuous locations. We have been talking to the EMSD as to how the data should be displayed, because every commercial building will be required to conduct this energy audit, and the results will also have to be displayed. And then by that time, the public will also have a better idea as to how commercial buildings are consuming electricity. Well, yes, Mr. Sin Chung Kai, more than 10 years ago, we've been talking about this excess reserve capacity. Vivian, you will have to go back to look at those papers. I think the administration should be the gatekeeper. But then I'm interested in para 9 with regard to the 5% adjustment. Well, last year or this year, when they increased the tariff, ultimately, CLP asked for 12%, but then subsequently, they asked to increase it by 82 cents, but then subsequently they reduced it to 4.9%, and subsequently they used the stabilization fund, and then they managed to reduce it substantially. So are we going to enter the same cycle this year? That is for CLP. If it continues to increase that, all right. Last year, I don't know how come you agree that they would be able to ask to increase it by 5.3%, because if the basic tariff is all right, the agreement is 5%, and over 5, you will have to have the EXCO's approval. And then there are also objective standards, because originally they wanted to increase it by over 20 cents, and then subsequently you were able to strike a deal with them. All right, in para 9, you talk about the 5%. So does that mean that the administration will be able to keep it at 5%? So you will have to keep it below. You will be able to keep it at below 5%. Is that what you can do under the SCA? Because in that paragraph you said that under the earlier agreement that was set at 7%, and now you've managed to reduce it to 5%. So whatever CLP might be doing, whatever price it might be asking, you will still be able to keep it at 5%, and also for the 3.3 cents. So will we be able to have it again this year? Vivian, Chairman. Well, on this year's proposed tariff adjustment, CLP actually had the 3.3 cent rebate for its customers. As to what's going to happen next year, well, at this stage, I'm not able to say, because the next meeting in December will be when we'll be giving you an account as to the arrangement for next year, and then we will be giving you a full account at the next meeting. With regard to the 5%, in para 9, we're talking about the basic tariff. I'm just referring to the basic tariff. Well, under the 5-year plan, when they come up with the development plan, then the EXCO will have this rolling program, and then the EXCO would be approving this forecast or projected basic tariff. We already provided the figure earlier this year. With regard to the 5% operation, that is the projected tariff. If it's set out there, then if the power company in a particular year wants to increase basic tariff by a certain rate, if it's within the 5% approved, then there is no need for the EXCO to approve it again, because it was already approved by the EXCO. So that's how it operates. Yes, Elizabeth Quat.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I want to reiterate, as I said just now, the DAB, in terms of the stable supply of electricity and the stable tariff, this is the administration's responsibility. I hope that in the medium and long-term review, when the administration sets down its strategy, they should abide by these principles, and they should take a holistic and wholesome approach in considering electricity supply. I hope the administration can answer my point on shale gas. And for commercial buildings, they're required to conduct a carbon audit every year. And this covers shopping malls. So after conducting the audit, what will happen? If they do not meet the target, what will happen? Secretary. Thank you, Dr. Quad, for your supplementary question. On shale gas, Vivian can supplement on this. As for a diversity of resources, we agree that our policy has to strike a balance on price, environmental protection, and safety and stability. Vivian. Dr. Quad talks about the adequate supply of shale gas in the United States. So in terms of securing a stable supply of natural gas, they do better in this regard. But in relation to investigation, excavation, production to transmission, well, there are different steps, and the key point is about transmission. And it depends on whether export facilities are available for transmitting natural gas from a particular point. For example, there might be supply in North America, but it may not be transmitted to Hong Kong. Chairman, I'm not asking whether the shale gas in the United States can be transmitted to Hong Kong. I'm asking whether the administration will consider conducting studies on on natural gas or other sources of energy available to us in from the surrounding areas. In relation to the procurement of energy supply and the stabilization, this may be a direction in the future. Secretary, this is a new development, and we will closely monitor the use of shale gas and its availability in our surrounding area and whether it's feasible. We will continue to observe the situation. We will look into it. We don't know the long-term impact yet, but we will fully consider it when we draft our long-term policy. Now, considering the ordinance, it covers the shopping malls, and this will give us a basis so that we know the consumption by shopping malls, because we don't just look at consumption, we look at the intensity in terms of electricity consumption and see if they have saved energy, and this will help us enhance energy efficiency, which may affect tariff. Secretary, when members asked how energy consumption can be reduced for commercial buildings and shopping malls, your reply was that we have requested these shopping malls to conduct carbon audits. But now your answer is that the figures is only for research purposes. So how can you actually reduce consumption? Secretary, well, this ordinance has just come into effect in September this year. And for carbon audits conducted under this ordinance, we need to accumulate figures over a long time. We need to get the figures before we refine the regulatory regime on the basis of the figures. For example, how more energy can be saved, etc. Thank you, Secretary. I received a letter from Ronnie Tong, Kenneth Chan, and Dennis Kwok to this panel to suggest the establishment of a subcommittee on the monitoring of the two power companies. Now, or the monitoring of the electricity market. Well, this panel is exactly tasked to monitor the electricity market, so we do not need to set up a subcommittee. This is exactly what the panel is tasked to do. And I have also discussed this issue with Deputy Chairman, and he holds the same view as well. So any other views? Mr. Sin Chung Kai. Chairman. Last year, our panel held 4 or 5 meetings extra. Chairman, you're a very busy person. You're also an EXCO member. So can you give an undertaking that when we ask for special meetings to be held, you will definitely hold the special meetings instead of using excuses? We should have special meetings not just to talk about tariff increase. Last year, after the announcement of the proposed tariff increase, we had a series of meetings, and after the 27th, we did not have any further meetings. It seemed that we were keen on this subject for a short time only. So we should have more meetings on interim review, not just on the tariff increase. Mr. Sin Chung Kai, you also saw that I have been sitting here all day, whereas members came in and out, and if necessary, I would definitely support the conduct of more meetings. What is meant by you will support it? I mean, if members make such requests, I still need to ask if the administration can provide the relevant information before we call for a meeting, because there must be something for us to discuss at the meeting. Monitoring of electricity market, this is exactly within our scope. This is within the scope of the panel. Just like last year, we had more than just one or two meetings. We had a series of meetings within several weeks' time. So you should not question this. Mr. Ronnie Tong, any other views? Mr. Ronnie Tong. Chairman, we have made this request. It's somewhat different from what you said just now. Chairman, you said that when necessary, you will call for a meeting. But the setting up of a subcommittee is not about necessity. It's not just about holding meetings when there is proposed tariff increase, etc. We should focus on preparations and studies. For example, we can invite experts to come and offer their views so that we draft a report for the administration to consider our views on the medium and long-term strategies. Of course, Chairman, if you say that, all right, if any member wants to hold a meeting and invite experts to come and give their views, for example, when I spoke, I talked about interconnectivity and opening up the power grid and whether the SCAs should be replaced by legislation. If you ask whether these matters are necessary to be discussed, I say it's necessary. But at every meeting, Chairman, of course, you need to spend time on it. But whether there is sufficient time to deal with all the issues I have raised, I don't think so, Chairman. If you think that you personally can cope with these requests, and any time you will accept our requests in holding meetings, then so be it. Is it your case? I said very clearly that many members have expressed their views, and I just consolidate their views and speak on their behalf. Mr. Wong Ting Kwong. I think there are two problems if we set up a subcommittee. If we have to focus on the problems and the concerns raised, I agree with Chairman that we can call for a special meeting. If we casually set up some committees, then will it override the work of the panel? If we do it too casually, then we will be having a very busy schedule, and will also increase the workload to the Secretariat. So I hope, Chairman, you can take on board views of some members consider discussing these issues at special meetings of the panel. I don't want to go on with this discussion. We have different views, so let's put this to a vote. For those in favor of the setting up of a subcommittee, please raise your hand. 5. Those against, please raise your hand. No, sorry, I can't hear you. Sorry, speakers off mic. Please ring the division bell.
我再講一次，呢個投票呢就係決定成唔成立。
Alright, this is a vote to decide whether or not we'd like to set up a subcommittee on regulating the power market. Will those in favor please raise their hands?
好，反對嘅請。
Those against please raise their hands. The result is 6 for and 7 against, and the motion is not passed. Chairman, as it's not passed, I asked another question just now, and I hope that you can give us an indication as to how that would be dealt with. Well, on certain areas, I like to invite experts and also deputations to come. For example, I talk about legislation and how we can introduce more competition. Well, the council should also come up with a stance, so I'm sure you would agree with that, right? Yes, as I said, if there is any request from members and if we think that there is a need, we can always do that. All right, thank you. I'd also like to take the opportunity to summarize our discussion so far today. Well, many different views have been expressed, and there are also different suggestions, including the future use of nuclear power and also how it should be regulated, and also on tariff issues, whether or not there should be segmental tariff and also progressive scale or scaling rate, and also the introduction of natural gas. And also some members also said that the tariff structure should balance the need to ensure that it's affordable to different sectors of a community. I don't think I need to spell out everything. I'm sure everything is recorded in the minutes, and I hope that after extensive consultation, the administration will come up with a proposal and it will be passed on to this council as soon as possible, and when necessary we can have further discussions on that. And especially according to the Undersecretary, she would also like us to have a better understanding of the latest developments of nuclear power and issues of public concern. So please do let us know that. So thank you very much for coming to our meeting today. Next, public consultation on proposal to impose concentration limits of phthalates in toys and childcare products. So let's invite the administration team to join us. With us today, Mrs. Alice Cheung. She's the Deputy Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development, and Mr. Wong Yu Cheung, acting head of trade controls of the Customs and Excise Department, and Dr. Albert Au, Senior Medical and Health Officer of the DFH. Thank you. Over to the officials who will walk us through the paper. Thank you, Chairman. Last week, that is in mid-November, we just published a public consultation paper on certain types of toys and childcare products, and if they contain phthalates, then there will be a concentration limit imposed on that, and that's the commonly called plasticizers, and is commonly used in PVC products, and the purpose is to increase the elasticity of these products and thus durability of these products. And in the different places, they have conducted tests on plasticizers, and it's been shown that with regard to certain types of pellets, it might have adverse impacts on the development of children. And in the EU, Singapore, and other places, they have introduced legislation on certain products which might come into close contact with children, and they've also imposed this concentration limit on the use of this product, and we are actually following the example of these economies with regard to the 6 types of phthalates. We are going to impose this limit, and our public consultation will last until mid-January 2013, depending on the response from the public. We expect that during the second half of this legislative session, we'll be able to introduce legislation for the purpose. So that's all for my introduction. I'll be happy to take questions. We have Mr. Sin Chung Kai, Elizabeth Court, and also Ronnie Tong. Mr. Sin, 5 minutes each. Yes, the administration has not done anything before, but then in EU, in 1999, they already came up with appropriate regulations, and then in 2005, they further tightened the control. In Hong Kong, we are actually 12 years later than what they have done, so we have lagged behind rather substantially. Still, it's better late than never. That's why I support the administration's proposal to submit legislation before this council for an early enactment. But then my question is, yes, of course, this is the first stage. That is, we will have to consult the public on whether we need to introduce legislation, and I suppose this is supported by this council. Then, under the circumstances, then in terms of the actual enforcement, what is the administration going to do? Because this is rather technical, because at the point of import, how are we able to ensure that for the ordinary public, they will be properly protected? Yes, Deputy Secretary. Thank you, members, for your questions. Well, in fact, the legal framework has always been there. The thing is what types of products should be subject to the control. And under the current regulatory framework, the CNE department is the enforcement agency. With regard to the products or substances that are under control, for example, they will conduct test purchase, and after the test purchase, they can also conduct tests on it, and then they can also ask for a recall. They can also ban the sale. They can also take out criminal prosecution. So the CNE department has been conducting regular and irregular checks on the products. For example, for toys during a particular season, they might also conduct special operations. Yes, of course, there will be a cut-off date after the enactment of legislation by this council. What about products that have been imported? So will there be a grace period and so on? So these are the details. Well, for the legislation that is in place, well, I think you can confiscate them, you can also fine them, you can also send them to prison and so on. But then you're actually banning the import of such products. So I don't know. Do you have any grace period and so on? What is your current thinking? Well, thank you. Well, basically, it's like other toys and products with new standards. After the consultation, when we come up with the new legislation, for example, there might be a cut-off date, let's say 3 months after the commencement of the legislation, this law will come into effect, but then it will not be too long. We are not talking about, say, a year's grace period. We might be giving a several months grace period. So to be more specific, can the administration at this stage, I assume that you're going to do it anyway. So the assumption is after a certain period of time, let's say several months, the law will come into effect. So has the administration made any preparation as to what types of products would not be able to meet the latest requirements? Because in the paper, you have set out some technical details. So how are those going to be translated into plain language explanation, so that the public will be able to understand it, so that the public will know which products will be subject to the new controls, and they will have to be aware of that. We'll arrange for the dissemination of information, and the CNE department will also be doing some public education. We hope that at the time when the legislation comes into effect, there will be information disclosed to the public as to the new bans. Can you explain this to us? Because first of all, I have to declare, because I'm also a toy manufacturer. In fact, if you look at the legislation in Hong Kong on toys, there are 3 standards. We follow the EU, the US, in terms of the legislation. Well, in the US, they have the ASTM, and then in the EU, they have this 71 legislation. So for products that have to be exported from Hong Kong, we will have to follow such regimes. So if products are from Europe, then these are the standards that they will have to comply with. And when we export our products to these countries, we also have to follow those standards. So can you tell us more about this? So at present, for the import standards, what are the standards right now? Chairman, you're right. For the toy and childcare products legislation, we do have 3 sets of regulations. That is for toys that are able to meet one of those 3 standards. That is the ASTM in the in the EU or in the US, and also the ISO and EU standards. And also for childcare products, there are some 20 products which will have to, or there are 12 products that will have to meet certain standards. And the coverage would include manufacturing, import, and sale. But then for export and also for transshipment, as the chair just said, they will have to meet the requirements of the place of destination or the destination. With regard to fillets, that is plasticizers, well, even in the EU, these are additional requirements. So it's not under the ASTM or ISO. These are additional requirements, and therefore we are also following this approach. And so we will be adding this to our existing standards. Elizabeth Quat, well, Chairman, to safeguard the health of infants and also children, and also to encourage giving birth, we are in favor of this. That is, the DAB is in favor of that. But then we have also read reports, and according to the Consumer Council, with regard to PVC, apparently it can also be found in different products. For example, even in lip balm and also cosmetics and also skincare products, and that could also result in premature menopause and also malfunctioning of certain systems and so on. So would you be also upgrading those standards for those other products? Well, Ms. Quat referred to certain products because they are not toys and childcare products. Well, actually, in another piece of legislation, that is CAP 456, that is consumer products legislation, we will be regulating that under that legislation, and that would also give powers to the C&E department, which will be able to look at other jurisdictions and other countries with regard to their standards in checking these products that are available in the market. And such standards can also be used to determine if they are safe. Indeed, under the current legal framework, we have already been given the power to do it. And as regards the C&E department's actual operation or actual checking of the products, I'll defer to Mr. Wong from the C&E department.
Just to supplement, in the past we have taken samples of food containers and cosmetic products to conduct tests, and indeed we have yielded some positive results, but they did not exceed the EU standards. So for normal users, there shouldn't be any problem. I want to clarify, Chairman. So there are already standards for other types of products, and if the levels exceed the standard, the C&E will enforce the law. Yes, Mr. Ronnie Tong. As I understand, if we tighten our standards requirement, there shouldn't be any huge impact on exporters because they have to abide by overseas standards anyway. if our standards are not much higher than those in other countries, I believe the manufacturers in Hong Kong should be able to cope with the adjustment. As for imported toys, I think that there could be a problem. The paper doesn't say anything about toys imported from the mainland. I think mainland is our main supplier rather than the United States. After we tighten the standards to align with the European and American standards, what will be the impact on the import of toys from the mainland? Can we have some information? Yes, Mr. Tong is right. According to our knowledge, the standard adopted by the mainland is that there is no particular standard for plasticizers. And it's exactly because of this reason that our standards must not be lower than those in other countries, because we may become a dumping ground for these substandard products that cannot meet the EU requirements. As for mainland manufacturers, for toys procured by merchandisers in Hong Kong from the mainland, this is what we want to know in this consultation exercise. Apart from a public consultation, we also write to toys merchants and trade associations and chambers of commerce to see what the impact will be. Well, but what is the scope? Is it that they may attract criminal liability just by signing an agreement to import the toys, or at the point when they really import the toys? Well, first of all, I agree with this regulation. But what will be the impact on local consumers? Will they be given far fewer choices? Have you consulted the views of consumers? Yes. During the consultation period, different parties, including consumers, can air their views. Importers and exporters can also give us their views. Now, just now, the member asked 2 questions. In fact, for manufacturer, importer, or seller of substandard products, they may contravene the law. So it's at the point of import that they break the law, not at the point of signing the agreement. As for whether fewer choices will be made available for consumers, we have actually conducted some studies. Well, there are substitutes to these 6 types of phthalates. As for the price or the usage, well, probably the price may go up if these substitutes are used. As for consumers' choices, whether there will be fewer choices, well, since we have substitutes for these 6 types of phthalates, and this is the global trend, and in particular, we're talking about toys that infants may come into contact with, for example, baby stummies or bottle treats. It's important that we abide by the standards. We're not being too lax or too stringent. Dr. Fernando Zhang. Thank you, Chairman. The Labour Party supports the regulatory control on the endocrine interfering in receptors. Well, this regulation is too late. We are more than 10 years later than the EU legislation, and it's confined to toys. According to overseas studies, one of the main sources of contact is food packaging material, and also cosmetic products, as mentioned. And in Taiwan and France, some beverages have been found to contain this chemical. According to the information provided by Greenpeace, the EU has already incorporated this chemical in the list of chemicals to be phased out. And that is to say, in the coming years, the chemical will be phased out from the market. They cannot be manufactured or used. But our legislation is limited in its scope. If there is no regulation on its use, if it's no regulation on its use in cosmetic products or food products, I don't know if the administration would step up its regulation and control in this regard. Well, DS, please focus on toys and children's products, because we are talking about this ordinance. If you want to follow up on the food products, you can follow it up at another panel. Chairman, I thought we should be concerned about public safety. It's not that we're not concerned about the public safety, but this is about the consultation of this ordinance as set out in the agenda. Our topic is about consultation on this ordinance. If you touch upon other matters, you can have a discussion at another panel. Yes, thank you, Chairman. As said just now, for other products, it's under Cap 456 Consumer Goods Sale Ordinance. We can conduct tests, and it's subject to other requirements. Food products, well, it's not under this ordinance, but I do have some information. Let me give a brief response. Of course, this will be taken up by the FEHD, but the Food Safety Center, the Center for Food Safety, also follows the indicators like daily tolerable limits. They set down action limits, and if the content exceeds a certain limit, they can take action. But I cannot answer in detail on their behalf. Mr. Tan Ka-pil. Thank you, Chairman. Well, just now you said that the CNE can enforce the law under Cap 456. So is it the same standard that 0.1% will be the limit, and is the sentencing the same? Level 6 fine, because for parents, they may not have read the content. They might have bought the toys for the child. So I want to make it clear. Is it that regardless of the type of products, the limit must not exceed 0.1% by weight? Yes. Now, in different countries, they have different limits for different products. For example, for foodstuff, the limit of 0.1% is not used. They have another limit level. As for the 0.1% mentioned, it's only applicable to products like toys and children's care products. For sucking, mouthing, and facilitating sleeping of children under 48 months old, and this standard is adopted by EU, America, and Canada. As for other products like cosmetics and food containers, different jurisdictions have different standards. For a particular product, the CNE will make reference to the limits applicable to that product in overseas jurisdiction. Now, I am a father. I need to be reassured. Sometimes when I buy a piece of toy, I won't look at the content before I buy it, and I will let my daughter hold the toy to sleep. So some children's products may not set out clearly about the content. I think the legislation should be passed as soon as possible. But the focus is, well, say if it's written on a toy that is suitable for children aged 5 or above, then it can escape the law. Yes. About the limit of plasticizers in overseas jurisdictions, the CNE can provide this information later. About the age of 48 months old, we're talking about child care products. It is so said because usually these products are mouthed by children. They may suck on it or put it in their mouth, and the use of plasticizers under such circumstances can be released. As for other products, why aren't 0.1% used? That's because, say, for a glass or a cup, you will not suck it for a prolonged period of time, whereas for a bottled teat or milk bottle, you will do that. I hope that publicity and public education can be done properly once the legislation is passed. We should know clearly what kind of products are subject to the regulation. So I think that a more comprehensive review is necessary. Finally, Mr. Chung Kwok Pan, and I'll draw a line here. If members have no other views, I will extend today's meeting by 15 minutes. Mr. Chung Kwok Pan. Chairman, as we all know, most of the products are manufactured in China, and in terms of quality, they may vary very substantially. So, for such a technical matter, they may not be very familiar with it, as in particular for importers. So apart from publicity and public education, can more be done to help wholesalers and importers understand the legislation? Head of CNE. In fact, we have regular seminars with the sectors. We introduce to them what matters to be paid attention to. So we will be holding similar seminars in relation to plasticizers. We will remind importers and wholesalers the points to note. I recall a few years ago that a small operator sold a chess game, and the chessboard, the paper chessboard, was not did not meet the standard of thickness. And I hope that the SMEs will not be affected. I hope that similar incidents won't happen again. Like I said, we will step up education through our website and the distribution of leaflets.
Lastly, I'd like to put this to the Deputy Secretary concerning plasticizers. They change over the years, and now we have got this latest standard. So for the latest plasticizers, they have been produced from plants. So in terms of the actual enforcement in the international community, in particular with regard to the toys industry, they do agree with the enforcement standards. I also know that for some of the toy manufacturers and also the chambers of commerce, well, in terms of production, technology-wise, it's not a problem at all. In fact, for people who have been using the plasticizer in question, well, that has been in use for some years now, because of the different requirements by different countries, and now. And actually, we could have introduced the new standards earlier. With regard to the labeling, there are also very clear requirements, and I understand that the C&E department has been conducting checks, and they would also be doing so without advance notice. And for products are coming from the US or from the EU, well, we have greater confidence in that. But then for mainland manufacturers, if they want to export their products to the EU or to the US, they will also have to meet those standards. But then for some Southeast Asian countries, when their products come to Hong Kong, will you conduct more stringent tests on them? So, Commissioner, will you have special measures to deal with the more backward countries when they try to import products into Hong Kong, and also for the wholesalers and also the importers? I think they are aware of that, and they will also be implementing these standards. So will you be adopting the same standards when it comes to testing of these products? Well, we have this risk management approach, so that for products from the less advanced economies, we'll be conducting more tests. Well, for people from the industry, they will know better. Well, for children and also parents are buying toys for their children, if they are not aware of that, then of course they might be concerned, as Mr. Tang just said. And therefore, you might be doing a bit more publicity so that people can be rest assured when they buy a particular toy and so on. This is actually rather technical in terms of its amendment, but then as some members have said that if the relevant toy legislation can be improved so that parents can be better assured, then of course it's a good thing. Yes, I agree. It's not just about plasticizers, because we do have standards imposed on other products, and therefore in terms of public education and publicity, we should be able to do a better job. Okay, if there are no further comments on this, I hope that we can complete the legislation or legislative process as soon as possible. Okay, if there are no further comments, then thank you very much for coming to this meeting today. Thank you. Next, the pilotage ordinance amendment. So, our pilotage amendment bill. Let's invite the administration team to join us. With us today are Mr. Yao Shengmu, Under Secretary, Ms. Julia Chen, Deputy Secretary, and Ms. Jenny Chen, Principal Assistant Secretary, and Mr. Chong Siu Men, Assistant Director from the Marine Department, and Mr. Lai Chi Tong, General Manager, Vessel Traffic Services from the Marine Department. Welcome to you all. All right, Under Secretary, as soon as you are ready, please walk us through the paper. Sorry, let's wait till other colleagues have taken their seats. Chairman, I understand that time is running out, and therefore I'll be very brief in my introduction. For this paper, is on the Pilotage Amendment Bill 2012, and we are here to consult members. At present, since 1985, we introduced this mandatory pilotage requirement. It provides that for raw non-Hong Kong registered vessels, when they are in Hong Kong, they will have to have pilots on board of the vessel, and they will have to be familiar with Hong Kong's navigational channels and also the operation in Hong Kong, so that they'll be able to ensure that the vessels will be able to operate safely in Hong Kong in order to safeguard lives and limbs. So there are several highlights in the proposed amendment bill. Number one, with regard to those at or over 65, if they're licensed pilots, when they apply for continuation of work, even if they have already been promoted to Class 1, then under the current legislation, they can only be Class 2C pilots, and under the new proposal, this restriction will be lifted. And the second one is the Marine Department has reviewed the current traffic management measures, and for vessels of gross tonnage of over 1,000 and 3,000 tons, the requirement that they will have to have pilots on board will be lifted. And also, with regard to the location of the pilot boarding station near Lam Kok Choi, it will be moved a little. It will be moved by 1.5 nautical miles, so that for vessels, they'll be able to travel a little longer distance in order to improve navigational safety. So it will be moved 1.5 nautical miles north. And there are some miscellaneous amendments. And basically, on these amendments, we have consulted the relevant advisory board, and we've also got their support, that is the Pilotage Advisory Committee, and we'll be submitting the proposed amendment bill within this year, and of course we'll take on board your views before we do so. Alright, 2 members have registered, Mr. Tan Ka-pil and Mr. Sin Chung Kai. Any other members? If not, then I'll draw a line here, 3 minutes each. Well, we have 106 pilots right now, and they are very professional, and their pay is also very handsome, and they are highly regarded. And for vessels with a gross tonnage of below 3,000 tons, they will have to have pilots. And also with the commissioning of the Kai Tak cruise terminal, I'm sure the number will grow. And for people who have to retire later, it shows that the number is not enough. And therefore, with regard to the Policy Bureau, in terms of training up local young pilots, what have you done? And also, in projecting into the next 10 years, will there be a need for the number to go up further? Under Secretary, yes, thank you for your question. Well, I'll look at it from 2 perspectives. Number one, well, for vessels coming into Hong Kong, well, if you look at the growth rate, it's not very obvious. In other words, the growth has been rather steady. That's why for licensed pilots in Hong Kong, we have 106 of them here, and they are able to meet the current demand. But then, as we can see, the situation is that many of them are rather senior in age, and we have seen that in the past, and we have done something about it already. Well, mainly, the administration has introduced some training programs for young people to enter the profession, so that they'll be able to become licensed pilots, which is a very professional trade, and the Marine Department is responsible for that. Perhaps I can defer to the Marine Department, which will give you more details as to the effectiveness of this training. Yes, Mr. Chung. Yes, thank you, Chairman. We noticed that for new blood in the profession, the number is not that large, and therefore, in order to maintain a steady source of supply, the department since 2004 has introduced this marine training incentive program to encourage the young people to undergo training, and then they'll be able to get the relevant professional qualification. Up till now, that is as at mid-November, for those who have undergone this training, we have over 225 such trainees who have undergone the training, and out of them, 72 have actually got the qualification to become senior deckhand class 3, and 3 have managed to become a coxswain or coxswain. In other words, they can also become trainee pilot. That's the necessary qualification before they can become trainee pilot. I think my question is similar to that of Mr. Tang. So, is your department confident that in the next 5 to 10 years you'll be able to train up how many pilots? Yes, I think it's very clear, 106 right now, and you're actually deferring their retirement age. So you're actually extending their retirement age. So what plans do you have in nurturing more? And also, can you give us their age profile so as to have so that we can have a better idea as to the urgency of this issue? Yes, for the current age profile is on the high side. For those over 50, actually some 70% of them are over 50. And that's precisely what we have noticed in the past. Well, there is this gap in terms of the age profile, and therefore we are encouraging more people to join the profession. And as the Marine Department just said, in launching this program, it's been very popular with the young people, and of course it will take time, and they will have to accumulate experience, and they will have to undergo training. And because of this requirement, it's not very popular with many young people these days. But then I'm sure this profession also does not require large numbers of people, and therefore under debate on the basis of what we are doing, we believe that we should be able to fill in the gaps so that there would not be this gap between the supply and demand. I'm afraid we will have to extend our meeting by another 10 minutes because there are members who are still in the queue. Mr. Frankie Yik, yes, as members have said, we are concerned about the transition. And you also talk about some relaxation measures in the short term that would help. But then that also came to my mind because I've also taken some launch boats in Jimsha and Yamate. So it's like playing with joystick. So they are actually coming into the harbor on a daily basis. So do we really need to have pilots to guide them or to do the navigation? That's point number one, because we're actually talking about some vessels coming into Hong Kong, and we will have to have pilots. And if these vessels come in and out of Hong Kong very frequently, they should know the navigational channels very well. And therefore, is that requirement necessary? Does it have to be a licensed pilot? You will have to think about it, because actually you're talking about the inward harbors or the inland harbors, so or inland waters. Is it necessary?
And the Secretary, this requirement seeks to ensure, as far as possible, that large vessels on entering Hong Kong waters can navigate safely. And according to Mr. Yik's views, whether changes can be made for vessels that are already very familiar with Hong Kong waters, well, we can look into that, but we have to be very careful, because the vessel master may be very familiar with the waterways, but our port is actually subject to a lot of changes. But anyway, I understand the good intention of the member. In terms of pilotage and the workload, this may be changed to alleviate the workload. So if I understand correctly, for vessels frequently entering and leaving Hong Kong waters, is pilotage required for these vessel masters, regardless of the length of vessels? Yes, this is the first question. Second question is whether pilotage must be carried out by qualified pilots, because it's not easy to get this qualification. Young people need to be qualified before they can take up this job. Now, for vessel masters or pilots that are familiar with the job already, can we sort of lower the qualification requirements? Under Secretary, we may need to further categorize the vessels and see whether these vessels have to travel far out of Hong Kong waters. But our established practice is not like this. If the vessel exceeds certain tonnage, and at present is 3,000, pilotage will be required. And actually, we have relaxed the requirement for vessels passing the Kuai-Ching container terminals. In the past, compulsory pilotage applies to ships of 1,000 gross tonnage or over. But in our past experience, there is room for improvement. For example, there is a control station in Kuai-Ching. We also have a 24-hour patrol launch. And for river trade cargo vessels, we also require them to install automatic identification system, so that the Marine Department's control station can track the locations and the situation of those vessels. And after implementing these improvement measures, we feel that there is no need for compulsory pilotage of these vessels proceeding to or from the container terminals. Of course, we can further look into these suggestions, but I think the point of the regulation is that for vessels exceeding a certain amount of gross tonnage, these vessels can be outgoing vessels. So when they enter the waters again, the compulsory pilotage should be required. Finally, Mr. Ronnie Tong, I'm more concerned about the arrangements at Kuai-Ching container terminals. After the Lamma Island vessel incident, I think the administration should tighten up regulation rather than relaxing it. According to the paper, as the navigational arrangements are very clear and the advanced technology is very reassuring, the department is suggesting this change. But it's very important for the pilot to gauge the situation and make necessary changes. It's not just about pilotage, because pilots are very familiar with the surrounding and they can deal with immediate situations. Based on the Lamma Island incident, what we heard is that even if the Marine Department can spot the vessel through the radar system, they may not be able to contact the vessel master immediately. If they could do that, the Lamma Island vessel incident could be avoided. So we should tighten up regulation, but on the contrary, the administration is proposing to lift this requirement. Is it because of the manpower shortage or remuneration for pilots? Have you considered whether this is an appropriate suggestion to make at this time and in this political environment? I understand that members are concerned with navigational safety. May I explain that for the two vessels involved in the Lamma Island incident, these are local vessels. I understand that no pilotage was required for these two vessels. I just want to quote this example. If you use remote monitoring technology or surveillance technology, you might not be able to deal with the immediate situation. Yes, it's true. For local vessels, since they frequent Hong Kong waters, they're not required to have pilotage service. Pilotage is mostly for foreign vessels which are not familiar with the ports and waters of Hong Kong. And when it comes to Kuai-Ting container terminals, we have noted that for pilotage to apply to ships of 1,000 gross tonnage or over, they are river trade cargo vessels that are regularly plying between the mainland and Hong Kong. And according to our past experience, with improvement in port facilities, the Marine Department could better monitor these vessels, and the situation has improved. And the number of marine accidents around that area is very small. Well, Lama Island and the water surrounding it, similarly, there are few accidents, but once it happens, it could be disastrous. For these river trade cargo vessels, there are many of them, but it doesn't mean that the vessel masters are experienced. For vessels proceeding to and from the Kuai-Ting container terminals, there are two types. One is ocean-going large cargo vessels. If they exceed 3,000 gross tonnage, compulsory pilotage is required. For smaller vessels with gross tonnage of 1,000 or more, at present, pilotage is still required. But if these vessel masters have successfully applied for exemption and passed the test, they will be given exemption. In the past, based on the performance of the vessel masters and the number of accidents, we find the risk of accidents is quite low, and this suggestion is an appropriate arrangement for the industry. I think members' views are quite clear. Navigational safety is the most important thing. Any measures introduced should take into account the safety of passengers and users nearby. So we support the need for pilotage, but some members are also concerned about the operation near Kuai-Ting container terminals. The administration should also pay attention to that. So thank you, Mr. Yao, and your team for taking part in the discussion. Any other business? Date of the next meeting will be the 11th of December 2012, Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. Anything other AOB? If not, then meeting adjourned.